Hey, what's up, guys? It's Mr. Davidian, and right now we're looking at the 1995 rhetorical analysis prompt regarding the company man. And so I'm going to try to take you through how I would go through it. I have not read this. I mean, I looked around the room when kids were doing theirs, but I haven't read this for about a year. So I have to do it all over again. Kind of forgot everything. Obviously, we're looking at rhetorical techniques that Goodman uses to convey her attitude toward Phil. Let's not forget the prompt. So right now it's 12:24. We'll start the clock. Let's see how fast we can do this. Find the main devices and then figure out how we can organize our essay. He worked himself to death. Powerful term. Finally and precisely at 3 a.m. Sunday morning. The obituary didn't say that, of course. It said that he died of a coronary thrombosis. I think that was it. But everyone among his friends and acquaintances knew it instantly. He was a type A workaholic. Classic. And they said to each other and shook their heads and thought for 5 or 10 minutes about the way they lived. This man who worked himself to death finally and precisely at 3 a.m. Sunday morning, on his day off, was 51 years old and vice president. He was, however, one of 6 vice presidents and one of 3 that who might conceivably, if the president died or retired soon enough, have moved to the top spot. Phil knew that. He worked 6 days a week, 5 of them until 8 or 9 o'clock at night. So this is important. During a time in which, when his own company had begun the 4-day week for everyone but executives, he worked like the important people. Capitalize, huh? Important people. He had no outside extracurricular interests unless you think monthly golf came that way. To Phil, it was work. He always ate egg salad sandwiches at his desk. He was, of course, overweight by 20 or 30 pounds. He thought it was okay, though, because he didn't smoke. On Saturdays, he wore a sports jacket, as if that makes it okay, to the office instead of a suit. So here you see a little bit of humor. So I'm going to put the big H right here, a little bit of humor. He had a lot of people working for him, maybe 60. Most of them liked him most of the time. 3 of them seriously considered for his job. The obituary didn't mention that. Like, this doesn't really matter, why she would include that. But it did list his survivors quite accurately. He is survived by his wife, Helen, 48 years old, a good woman of no particular marketable skills who worked in an office before marrying and mothering. She had, according to her daughter, given up trying to compete with his work years ago. Here you go. Some pathos right here, emotion between the wife and her husband. When the children were small, the company Fred said, "I know how much you will miss him." This may be an understatement or an overstatement, because maybe she won't. She says, "I already have for the last, however many years." Missing him all these years, she must have given up part of herself, which had cared too much for the man. She would be well taken care of by money. As if that matters to families when they lose their husband. His dearly beloved eldest and the dearly beloved children is a hardworking executive in a manufacturing firm. I think I misread that. His dearly beloved eldest of the dearly beloved children is a hardworking executive in a manufacturing firm. So the eldest son is also an executive. In the day and half before the funeral, he went around the neighborhood researching his father. Whoa, that's powerful, because he didn't know who his father was. They were embarrassed. His second child is a girl who is 24 and newly married. She lives near her mother and they are close, but whenever she was alone with her father in a car driving somewhere, they had nothing to say. Number 2 thing. So this is the first embarrassing thing. This is the second embarrassing thing. The youngest is 20, a boy, high school graduate who spent the last couple of years, like a lot of his friends, doing odd jobs to stay in grass and food. Don't know what that means. He was one who tried to grab at his father. Ooh, this is emotionally number 3. He was his father's favorite. Over the last 2 years, Phil stayed up nights worrying about the boy. The boy once said, "My father and I only board here." At the funeral, the 60-year-old company president told 48-year-old widow that the 51-year-old deceased had, this is too much craziness, would be hard to replace. This company president said it would be hard to replace him. The widow didn't look him in the eye. She was afraid he would read her bitterness, and after all, she would need him to straighten out the finances, the stock options, and all that. So she did not want to disappoint or disrupt or cause any issues with the president because he's in control of the stock options insurance money. Phil was overweight and nervous and worked too hard. If he wasn't at the office, he was worried about it. Phil was a type A, again, repetition. You could have picked him out of a minute out of a lineup. So when he finally worked himself to death at precisely 3 a.m., this is the third time it mentions this, Sunday morning, no one was really surprised. By 5 p.m. the afternoon of the funeral, the company president had begun, discreetly of course, with care and taste, to make inquiries about his replacement. One of 3 men, he asked around, who's been working the hardest? It ends on the company president trying to replace Phil. Discreetly, it says, which obviously the author is indicating her attitude toward the situation, about people that work hard and how they're used and abused. So, wow. We definitely have to mention his children here. We definitely have to mention the repetition here. We definitely have to mention the wife as well. And obviously he has some physical issues. It mentions you can pick him out of a lineup. He finally worked himself to death, which means we need to discuss the repetition. He was a type A workaholic. So how would I organize this essay? First off, let's describe her view or her attitude. We know that by using sly or witty humor, which was here, that he wore a sports jacket on the weekend to act like it was okay. We have some sad humor. It's not even humor, it's just sad that his children didn't even know him. So we have some sadness here. We have a little bit of humor here. And we just have him working really, really hard. And so then we have the company. Let's move on to a different color. We have the company trying to move on. Let's go to ink color. Yeah, this is going to take a while. Hopefully you guys don't have this much time on the test. We have the company, and I'm trying to do this with a mouse, so this is crazy. The company is trying to replace him immediately at his funeral, 2 hours after he died. He died 3 a.m. Sunday morning. Sorry, so this is 14 hours after he died. They have by 5 p.m. the afternoon of the funeral, at the funeral. So I'm wondering when the funeral was, if it was Saturday or what. It doesn't tell us when the funeral was. It just tells us that he died on Sunday, and we're trying to figure out, what day the funeral was, but we don't really know. 2 times it mentions that Phil would be hard to replace, and that the company would try to find out who's working the hardest. So obviously, we know that not only is she criticizing individuals for working hard, but she's ridiculing the companies for overworking people and being heartless, and that they're trying to replace people and find the hardest working people to move up to the top spot. And you can put that in quotations. With small humor or witty, sly humor, with Phil wearing sports jackets as if that makes working the weekend okay, she constantly describes him working himself to death. He was overweight, but at least he didn't smoke anymore. So this is humor number 2. We have a little bit of humor here. However, by using the repetition in the entire piece, by repeating the word he 20 times, I would say, maybe 10 to 20 times, and also 3 times mentioning that he died on a random Sunday at 3 a.m. It says 2 times that he was overweight. So she uses repetition on purpose. Why? I would suggest to show the similarities that as she repeats the fact that he died by working himself to death at 3 a.m. 3 times, she shows the redundancy, not only that he died at 3 a.m., but that his work was redundant, that he constantly works over and over and over. So her constant repetition shows the implication that he worked obviously too much, number one, but number two, the repetition reinforces the fact that he overworked redundantly. Number two, the fact that he wrote that he ate egg salad and wore a sports jacket made it okay for him to overwork, which is just humor. And so we would have to start relating that sometimes people dress down, but the point is that they're still overworking and they're still disregarding important people in their family. Number one, their wife. No one needed to tell her, because she's been married to this man and she gave up trying to compete with him years ago because he was just going to continue working. So by describing his wife, she is showing the impact. So the effects verb would be showing the impact that overworking can have on a relationship, not only with your closest loved one, specifically your wife, but also your children. She goes into more details on the children. See that Ellen Goodman spends a little bit of time discussing the wife, but she spends a lot more time describing the children. The first one was the eldest, who was an executive as well, but had to go around the neighborhood researching his father. This is a huge point, pointing out the fact that he did not even know his oldest son, and the humility that he faced by going around and researching who his dad was. I mean, how horrible that would be. There's so many words you could describe that. I can't think of any right now, but it's horrible that your own eldest son didn't know who you are. They had to research who you are. So explain that. Number two, the second is a girl, 24, newly married, didn't have anything to say to her father. Father figure, nothing to say. I mean, come on, she's an adult. She has nothing to say. Then the youngest boy. Of course, he had the closest relationship, and Phil obviously says that he was his father's favorite. Over the last 2 years, Phil stayed up at nights worrying about the boy. The boy once said, "My father and I only board here." So it seems like the boy also just went through life and didn't really spend too much time with his father either. They just lived in the same house. So by describing Phil's children, Goodman expresses the fact that overworking ruined his relationships with his children. And then you can go into the specifics. Sometimes men or people work really, really hard to create a good life for their children. But at the same time, by working too hard, he's ruined their lives or made them missed out on the relationships that he could have had with them, and gave them a weaker life or a lesser life or a more horrible life. And so the irony is that he thought overworking would give them a better life, but the fact is that it hurt their lives, hurt all their sons. And so finally, if you want to go to paragraph 4 now, we're on topic 3. We look at the heartlessness of the company. The company is moving on quickly, the same day of his funeral. And now Goodman obviously is pointing this out to show her attitude, that her attitude toward companies is a negative one, that she can see the heartlessness that companies have toward their workers, and that they'll easily and quickly replace people once they're fired, die, get sick, or quit. And so it shows, obviously, or hints at the fact that workers such as ourselves should not put our trust in companies, should not put all of our stake in companies, should not try to find our happiness in companies, because in 2 seconds they can replace us and move on. And all the joy and happiness that we thought we would find in a company will be for naught. And so she ends the essay strategically focusing on the company because it's her most powerful point. I mean, even though focusing on the wife and the children are equally powerful, focusing on the heartlessness of the company as she ends her piece with the quote, "Who's been working the hardest," really shows the fact that as Phil dies, the company doesn't care about Phil or his family or his kids, but they're just looking at the bottom line and trying to focus on how they can get their company better. And how about us? How many times do we focus on trying to improve or trying to work hard or trying to succeed in a specific field where that field is not going to care about us after the fact? And so Ellen Goodman is probably focusing on how can we prioritize things in our life. Work is probably not the number one thing, even though many of us try to make work number one, especially because of the benefits of money, security, and taking care of our family. However, it should not overweight or overpower or give more weight than the relationships we have with our wife and our children. And so Ellen is obviously pointing out or indicating the fact that relationships are more important than work. So come on in. Thank you guys for listening.